She didn't cry. That was the part nobody could understand afterward. Not the hotel manager, who had to be escorted out of the building by security. Not the front desk staff, who stood frozen behind their marble counter. Not even the guests in the lobby, who had watched the whole thing happen and said nothing. Lena Abara-Mensah did not cry. She picked up her bag from the floor where it had been thrown, adjusted her glasses, and walked to a chair near the window and sat down. That was all. The bag was the first thing Gerald Whitmore noticed when she walked through the revolving door of the Harrington Grand. He was the kind of man who noticed bags. In his 12 years managing the hotel, he had developed what he privately called an instinct, a talent for reading people before they even reached the desk. The shoes, the watch, the luggage, the way a person carried themselves. He was rarely wrong, or so he believed. The bag was canvas. Dark green, slightly faded at the corners, the kind you could find at any outdoor market. The woman carrying it wore dark jeans, a plain gray pullover, and running shoes that had seen too many mornings. Her hair was natural, pulled back loosely, and she wore no jewelry that he could see. She was somewhere in her 40s, he guessed. She looked tired. Not the kind of tired that comes from a long flight, but the kind that lives behind the eyes of people who have been working since before most people wake up. She walked toward the front desk without hurrying. Gerald moved to intercept her before she reached it. "Can I help you?" he said, and the way he said it made it clear that helping her was not what he intended. She looked at him. "I have a reservation." "Under what name?" "Abara. Lena Abara." He didn't move toward the desk to check. "Are you here to meet a guest?" A pause. "I am the guest." Something shifted in his expression. Not embarrassment, not yet, just a recalibration. "The Harrington Grand is a private hotel," he said. "We have a minimum rate of—" "I know the rate," she said. "I booked the Lakeview suite. 3 nights." He looked at her bag again. The canvas bag, the running shoes, and then he made the decision that would cost him everything. "I'm going to need to ask you to wait outside while we verify your reservation." "You're asking me to wait outside?" "It's hotel policy for—" "What policy?" He didn't have an answer for that. He had policies for many things, but not this one, because this one wasn't a policy. It was a choice. And he made it in front of 11 people in the lobby of the Harrington Grand on a Thursday afternoon in October, while the light came through the tall windows and it landed on the marble floor and made everything look very clean. Lena looked at him for a long moment. Then she set her bag down, took out her phone, and made a call. Gerald assumed she was calling a car. He was still assuming this when the call connected. "Theresa," she said, "pull the confirmation for my suite and send it to the front desk, and call legal." She hung up and sat down in a chair near the window. Gerald stood where he was, suddenly uncertain. The woman at the front desk, her name tag said Priscilla, 26 years old, 3 months into the job, had heard everything. She was already at her computer. She found the reservation in 4 seconds. Abara, Lena M. Lakeview Suite, Thursday to Sunday, prepaid. She looked at the screen. She looked at the total charge. And then she looked across the lobby at the woman in the gray pullover sitting by the window, with her canvas bag on her lap. And Priscilla felt something cold move through her. She picked up the desk phone and called Gerald's radio. "Mr. Whitmore, the reservation is confirmed." He came back to the desk. He looked at the screen. She turned toward him. His face changed. "I'll go speak with her," he said. "I think," Priscilla said carefully, "that might not be the right move right now." He didn't listen. He walked across the lobby toward the woman by the window. "Ms. Abara," he said, "there's been a misunderstanding." She didn't look up from her phone. "There hasn't. I apologize for the wait. We'd be happy to get you checked in. You asked me to wait outside." She looked up then. Her eyes were very steady, in front of everyone in this lobby. "You looked at me and decided I didn't belong here. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a choice you made. I understand you're upset." "I'm not upset," she said. And the terrible thing, the thing that Gerald would think about for years afterward, was that she wasn't. She was calm in a way that had nothing to do with peace. It was the calm of someone who had already decided what came next and was simply waiting for this conversation to finish. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, she said, and she went back to her phone. Priscilla checked her in. She upgraded the suite without being asked, adding a complimentary dinner reservation and a note in the system that flagged the file for manager review. She did this quickly, efficiently, and without looking up, because she was 26 years old and had 3 months of experience, and even she understood that something irreversible had just happened in this lobby. A bellman named Curtis brought the canvas bag upstairs. He was 61 years old and had worked at the Harrington Grand for 19 years. In the elevator, he said nothing. But when he set the bag down in the suite and turned to leave, he paused at the door. "Welcome to the Harrington Grand, ma'am," he said. And there was something in the way he said it. Not the trained warmth of hotel courtesy, but something quieter and more genuine. That made Lena look up. "Thank you," she said. He nodded and left. She stood at the window for a while. The lake was flat and silver in the afternoon light. There was a container ship on the horizon, barely moving. She watched it for a long time. Then she opened her laptop and went to work. What Gerald Whitmore did not know, because he had made his assessment in the lobby based on a canvas bag and a pair of running shoes, was that Lena Abara-Mensah had been in Toronto for a reason. She was there to meet with the board of directors of Pinnacle Hospitality Group. Pinnacle Hospitality Group was the parent company of the Harrington Grand. Lena had founded a logistics technology firm in Mississauga 17 years ago, in a rented office above a print shop on Hurontario Street, with $11,000 in savings and a business plan she had written in longhand in a notebook her mother had given her when she graduated from Ryerson. The firm was called Core Path Systems. It was not at this point in the story small. It was not at this point in the story unknown. What it was, at this point in the story, was the subject of an acquisition offer from Pinnacle Hospitality Group. An offer that had been in negotiation for 4 months and was scheduled to be finalized on Friday morning, the day after tomorrow, in a boardroom 12 floors above the Harrington Grand lobby. The offer was for $240 million. Gerald Whitmore had asked her to wait outside. She did not call the acquisition team that evening. She ordered room service, jollof rice and fried plantain from a West African restaurant, 3 blocks away, that the concierge found for her after she described what she was looking for. And she ate at the window and watched the lake go dark. She answered emails. She spoke to her daughter, who was 14, and in the middle of a science project about soil erosion and needed to talk through the methodology at length. Lena listened carefully and asked good questions and did not once mention what had happened in the lobby. She had learned a long time ago that you do not spend your energy explaining yourself to people who have already decided what you are. The acquisition team was 4 people. They arrived Friday morning in a car that the hotel had sent to the airport, wearing the kind of suits that existed specifically to communicate seriousness. The lead negotiator was a man named Douglas Fenn, 53, silver-haired, the kind of man who had spent 3 decades being right in rooms full of people who wanted him to be wrong. He had a warmth that was not performed. He had simply been in the business long enough to know that warmth was efficient. He had also spent the last 4 months learning everything there was to know about Lena Abara-Mensah. He knew she had grown up in Brampton, that her parents had come from Ghana in 1981 with enough money for a 1-bedroom apartment and a 6-month cushion, that her father had driven a cab for 11 years before he could afford to open a grocery store, and that Lena had worked the cash register every Saturday from the time she was 8 until she left for university. He knew she had graduated top of her class from the Ted Rogers School of Management. He knew she had been turned down for a business loan 3 times before a credit union in Etobicoke finally said yes. He knew all of this because it was the story she had told publicly, in interviews and keynotes and a TED Talk that had been viewed 4 million times, and because he had read all of it twice. He did not know what had happened in the lobby the previous afternoon. He found out at 8:47 in the morning, when he sat down across from Lena in the meeting room, and she slid a single sheet of paper across the table before the pleasantries were finished. It was a letter. 2 paragraphs, Formal, precise, and final. Corpath Systems was withdrawing from the acquisition process. Douglas read it twice. Then he looked up at her. She was calm. She had the same stillness she'd had in the lobby the day before, that quality of having already moved through the decision while everyone else was still arriving at it. "Lena," he said quietly. "What happened?" She told him. Not with anger, without performance. She told him what Gerald Whitmore had said, and how he had said it, and what it had felt like to stand in the lobby of the hotel that his company owned and be told to wait outside. She told him about the canvas bag and the gray pullover and the 12 people who had watched and said nothing. Douglas listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry," he said, and unlike the apology Gerald had offered in the lobby, this one arrived without a but attached to it. It didn't seek to reroute the conversation. It was just sorry. "I know you are," she said, "but I have to be honest with you, Douglas. What happened yesterday didn't happen because of one bad manager. It happened because of a culture. The way your staff is trained, the assumptions they're permitted to act on, the guests they decide don't belong before those guests have said a word. That's not an accident. That's a pattern. And I can't put my name on a company that runs on that pattern." She pulled the letter back across the table and tucked it into a folder. "My legal team will handle the formal withdrawal," she said. "I have no interest in making this difficult, but I am not going forward." Douglas looked at the table for a moment. He was a man who had closed a great many deals and lost very few, and he understood the difference between a negotiating position and a closed door. This was a closed door. "Is there anything I can say?" he asked. "You could start," she said, "by looking at why it took an acquisition target being humiliated in your lobby for this to become a conversation." She picked up her bag, the canvas bag, the dark green one, and stood. "I hope the next offer you make," she said, "you make to someone who's had an easier morning than I did yesterday." And she left. Douglas Fenn sat in the meeting room for a long time after she walked out. He had his phone in his hand, but he didn't make any calls. He was doing the calculation that you do when something goes very wrong very fast. The kind of calculation where you go back through every decision and ask which one was the one you could have caught. The answer, when he found it, was not complicated. A manager in a lobby, a canvas bag, 11,000 seconds of bad judgment. He called the CEO of Pinnacle Hospitality Group at 9:15. "We lost the Corpath deal," he said. There was silence on the line. "Douglas, we have been negotiating this for 4 months. I know 240 million. I know what the number is." He told the CEO what had happened. The CEO was a woman named Sandra Osi. No, wait, Sandra. He told her what had happened. And there was a silence on the line that was different from the first one. Heavier. The kind of silence that comes when someone is processing not just the facts but the implications. "Get me Gerald Whitmore," the CEO said. Gerald was in his office on the second floor when his phone rang. He had spent the morning doing what people do when they know something is wrong, but don't yet know how wrong. He had stayed busy, kept moving, filed reports, responded to emails, answered questions from his staff with the practiced authority of someone who is not thinking about the thing they are thinking about. He answered the call. He did not say much. When the call ended, he sat for a while. Then he called his wife. Then he sat again. He had been at the Harrington Grand for 12 years. He had started as an assistant manager in Victoria and worked his way east and up, hotel by hotel, through the kind of slow, patient career that rewards consistency. He was not a bad person, or at least he had never thought of himself as one. He had simply made a decision based on a canvas bag and a pair of running shoes, and 12 years of what he had convinced himself was instinct. He thought about what the woman in the gray pullover had said. "That's not a misunderstanding. That's a choice you made." He had thought at the time that she was being dramatic. He understood, now, that she had been precise. The news moved the way things move when they are true. Not explosively, not with a viral clip, or a trending hashtag. Lena had not posted anything, had not called a journalist, had not done the thing that people in her position often do when they have been wronged and have the platform to weaponize it. She had simply withdrawn from a $240 million deal and let that fact speak for itself. But facts of that size do not stay quiet. They travel through boardrooms and business columns and investment circles. And by the time they arrive in the places where they can do the most damage, they arrive without the original person having had to send them anywhere. The Globe and Mail ran a piece on Saturday. It was sourced from people familiar with the deal, which was the polite way of saying people who had been in the room. The piece did not name Gerald Whitmore. It did not need to. It named the hotel, and it named the deal, and it described, in the language of business journalism, the precise nature of what had happened. An acquisition worth $250 million had collapsed because a black woman in casual clothing had been told she didn't belong in her own hotel suite. The piece ran on a Saturday. By Monday morning, three things had happened. Pinnacle Hospitality Group's shares had dropped 4%. Gerald Whitmore had resigned, and 6 other companies had reached out to CorePath Systems to express interest in a conversation. Lena was back in Mississauga when the calls came in. She was at her desk at CorePath, in an office that had the same unhurried quality as the woman herself. Good light, a few plants, a framed photo of her daughter on the windowsill, a small wooden figure her father had carved years ago sitting on the corner of her desk where she could always see it. She took the calls one by one, listened carefully, asked the same questions she always asked, and made notes in the same longhand notebook she had carried since Ryerson. Her assistant, a young woman named Fatou, brought her a coffee mid-morning and paused in the doorway. "You're all over the news," Fatou said. "I know. Are you okay?" Lena considered this. She thought about the lobby, the canvas bag on the floor, the chair by the window, and the flat silver lake outside, the container ship that had barely been moving. "I'm fine," she said. And then, because it was true, and because Fatou had asked the question with genuine care, "I've been fine since Thursday. I just needed people to catch up." 3 weeks later, she'd signed an acquisition agreement with a firm based in Vancouver. The terms were different from Pinnacle's offer. They were better. The deal included a partnership clause that gave CorePath's original team retained equity, something Douglas Fenn had never offered, something she had asked for in month 2 of the Pinnacle negotiations, and been told was not on the table. It was on this table. The day the agreement was signed, Lena went home and made dinner. She made groundnut soup, her mother's recipe, the one that required standing at the stove for a long time and stirring and tasting and adjusting, the one that her daughter had been asking her to teach her for years. They cooked it together, the two of them in the kitchen on a Tuesday evening, with the radio on and the windows fogged from the steam. And Lena let her daughter do more than she was ready for, because that was how you learned. After dinner, her daughter asked about the deal. She had seen something online, had understood more of it than Lena expected. "Did it bother you?" her daughter asked. "What happened at the hotel?" Lena thought about how to answer. "It bothered me," she said, "but it didn't surprise me, and those are two different things." Her daughter looked at her across the table. "What did you do?" she asked. "When he told you to wait outside." "I sat down," Lena said, "by the window, and I made a call. That's all, that's all." Her daughter was quiet for a moment. She was 14, and she was learning, the way 14-year-olds do, what the world actually is versus what people tell you it is. It was a long lesson, and Lena knew it wasn't finished. "I would have been so angry," her daughter said. "I was," Lena said. "But angry doesn't always look like yelling. Sometimes angry looks like very, very calm." The wooden figure on her desk had been carved by her father in 1994, the year Lena turned 12. It was a small woman in a long dress, arms slightly raised, chin up. Her father had given it to her on a Saturday afternoon in the back of the grocery store, between customers, wrapping it in a piece of brown paper bag. He had not made a speech about it. He had simply handed it to her and said, in Twi, a phrase she had carried since, "You do not explain yourself to people who have already decided." He had meant it as practical advice, the kind her father always gave, the kind that came out of a life where you did not have the luxury of long arguments with people who were not listening. but she had held it for 30 years and it had never stopped being true. Gerald Whitmore had decided, in the time it took her to cross a lobby, what she was. He had been wrong. He had paid for it with his career. The company had paid for it with $250 million and a 4% drop in a week, and a story in every business publication that mattered. But none of that was the point. The point, the thing her daughter was trying to understand, the thing the most liked comment on the Globe piece was trying to say, was not that Gerald Whitmore had humiliated the wrong woman. He had humiliated a woman. That was where it started, and that was where it ended. The canvas bag was still green. The pullover was still gray. The running shoes still needed replacing. None of that had changed, because none of that was the thing that needed to change. She picked up the small wooden figure from the corner of her desk and held it for a moment, the way she sometimes did when something had finished, and she was looking for the feeling of completion. Then she set it back down, opened her notebook to a fresh page, and went back to work.